Good evening. So, one of the constants of American political life is an enduring faith in regime change. Now, this faith can take many forms. Seldom do you hear members of Congress or Senate or people seeking high office vocally affirm their support for the notion of regime change in the abstract. Regime change is not something that is very compelling when you think of it in broad strokes or in generalities, because the folly of regime change has been made manifest in the past 15 or so years, with the United States attempting it in Iraq, Libya, to some extent Syria, and you might even argue Afghanistan. And in none of those cases has it borne fruit in a way that is at least commensurate with the amount of resources that were devoted to the efforts, whether in terms of United States military casualties or money or other resources. So that's why when trying to discern whether a particular politician is supportive of regime change, you can't simply ask he or she about what they think of the notion of regime change. You have to ask them about a specific instance in which regime change policy is being pursued, even if it might not be specifically depicted as such, because regime change as a concept has fallen out of favor. It's not something that even the most virulent hawks in, say, the Republican Party, like Graham or McCain, they don't run around boasting about how much they love regime change. They'll support specific regime change endeavors, but they won't use that specific terminology because it's evocative of the failures of the past. So politicians tend to be cognizant of the fact that the public in general is highly skeptical of, at the very least, the efficacy and also probably the morality of trying to carry out regime change the world over. That's why they tend to omit using the terminology which will, light up the light bulb inside people's heads and get them to associate this proposed policy with the broader issue of regime change. So that's why you have to be very specific when trying to discern whether a particular politician supports regime change, because they're not going to affirm its utility in the abstract. You have to drill down to specifics, and the current regime change policy being pursued is in Syria. If you believe that Assad ought to be removed from office and that the United States should take a role in facilitating that removal, whether militarily or otherwise, then in effect you are endorsing regime change or a form of regime change. So when Dianne Feinstein, the longtime senator from California, Democrat, generally regarded as consistently quite hawkish, held a town hall meeting last week in Los Angeles, I wanted to see if I could get her to explicate her support for regime change, because during the course of the town hall, a constituent asked about her avowed support for Trump's airstrikes against a Syrian regime target in Syria, and she again stated her support for Trump in that regard. So I wanted to get, and given that she said, quote, the United States must take a more aggressive role in facilitating the, quote, ouster from office of Assad, that is tantamount pretty clearly to advocating a policy of regime change. But of course, Feinstein didn't use those particular words because they have a negative connotation. So afterwards, Feinstein was talking to some press, and what I did was I asked her, why should the United States or why should your constituents rather be confident at all in the ability of the United States to effectively facilitate regime change, which is what she had just called for earlier. And she basically agreed that skepticism of regime change as a policy prescription should be questioned. And she was doubtful. She expressed that it would be doubtful that the United States could effectively do that. She said, quote, "I don't think we should have any confidence in regime change right now." Well, that is not consistent with what she had advocated for earlier, and which she had advocated for many times prior, which is that the United States should take a more aggressive role in facilitating the ouster of Assad. That is just the basic definition of regime change. And if you're supporting airstrikes, which constitute an act of war on a Syrian government installation, that also is an action in furtherance of trying to attain regime change. So in all but words, she was advocating for regime change, but you'll notice that given her sort of equivocation here in the answer, she was very reluctant to actually endorse the concept. And she actually, and when I pressed her and said, what is ousting Assad if not regime change? She said, quote, "I don't want to get into semantics. I think you know what I was saying." Well, not really. I didn't know what she was saying. That's what I was asking for clarification. It seemed like in all but words, she was advocating for regime change because what she was saying could constitute nothing else. But she kind of dismissed this as semantics. But what it really is, I think, it's an indication of how deeply ingrained the utility of regime change is in the American political psyche. So people can advocate for it and demand that the United States take an active role in facilitating it without necessarily being fully conscious of what it is they're advocating. Because it's just seen as so natural and so rational for the United States to have an active role in deposing leaders around the world, whether militarily or otherwise. So the fact that people don't automatically associate that endeavor with regime change just shows the mental kind of gymnastics that are required to, on the one hand, situate yourself as a critic or a skeptic of regime change, given the failures in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan. And then on the other, advocate specific regime change initiatives, such as in Syria. Because what you can do is you could frame that in humanitarian terms, which, of course, make the United States out to be altruistic and benevolent rather than an imperial power, you might argue. Because only a malign imperial power would seek to effectuate regime change the world over, and of course the United States could not ever be classified as such. But I think this discrepancy needs to be pointed out frequently. And it's not only Feinstein who is an emblem of it. I also spoke to Mike Conaway, who is now a prominent Republican in the House, and he's now leading the House's Russia investigation, or co-chairing it. And he, too, expressed reticence when I questioned him about the track record of the United States pursuing regime change. But yet he was basically supportive of Trump's strikes and therefore endorsed the policy of regime change. While like Feinstein, on the one hand, he evinces skepticism of regime change as a tactic, and on the other, he's basically endorsing a specific instance of regime change. So that's just not consistent. One of the very few people to illuminate this contradiction is Tulsi Gabbard, who, we'll call regime change what it is. So ousting Assad, taking military action to oust Assad, even for ostensibly humanitarian reasons, constitutes regime change, and Tulsi Gabbard has been very clear in highlighting that. Rand Paul has as well. So there's recognition in some quarters that this is not a consistent position for so many people to be holding. But again, it's it's just so ingrained in the bipartisan political psyche that it takes a real argumentative effort to highlight how these discongruous ideas can be espoused simultaneously. So I think that's worth doing journalistically from my perspective, also analytically, which I also attempt to do. And I think two great examples of it just recently now are Feinstein and Conaway. So all this I laid out in a Medium post for the TYT Medium page, which I will link to in the description box. So go read that if you want this argument basically articulated or spelled out in written form. And then, of course, the video that I reference here are both, or the videos, I guess, that I referenced in this video are both linked to in the Medium post. So take a look at that and let me know what you think if you so desire. And that'll do it for now. Bye-bye.